There were not many people who truly understood just how broad his interests were, or exactly how supportive he was of an astonishingly wide range of organizations. Those words were spoken quietly behind the heavy oak doors of Buckingham Palace, but their impact struck the royal household like a sudden crack of thunder. King Charles had made his ultimate decision. Before a small, tightly restricted gathering of senior royals, the monarch formally handed Prince William complete operational control of the British crown. In a single, unprecedented moment, the daily authority, strategic direction, and most sensitive constitutional decisions of the monarchy were placed squarely into his eldest son's hands. But as a suffocating silence fell over the room, every eye turned toward Princess Anne, the one royal whose institutional approval could either steady this historic transition or tear the family completely apart. Before we dive deep into the chilling details of this palace shift and what it truly means for the future of the monarchy, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us here at Crown Watch so you never miss an insider breakdown of the real power struggles hiding behind the palace walls. King Charles entered that fateful morning meeting carrying a sealed red dispatch box. In the world of the British monarchy, the red dispatch box is the ultimate symbol of sovereign power, holding the state papers that require the monarch's immediate attention. Its presence on the table told William, Princess Anne, Queen Camilla, and the assembled senior advisors that this was no ordinary family discussion. Without preamble, the king announced that the Prince of Wales would now assume absolute control over daily royal operations, household appointments, confidential constitutional briefings, public relations strategy, and major national duties. While Charles would technically remain the sovereign, the actual daily machinery of the crown would now move entirely through his son. William did not smile. The gravity of the moment settled over him as he pulled his chair closer, met his father's weary gaze, and asked directly whether this new arrangement was merely temporary. Charles paused as an intense tension gripped the room, before answering with a heavy finality that there was no planned end date. The future king looked down, confronting a brutal truth. He had not been invited to gradually prepare for power. Power had already arrived. Princess Anne remained perfectly still, her hands locked tightly together. She had spent her entire life defending the monarchy through public scandals, deep grief, and explosive family fractures, yet her own brother had given her absolutely no warning about this monumental shift. The secrecy hurt, because this single decision fundamentally changed who commanded the royal household, who shaped its future, and crucially, who would carry the blame when something inevitably went wrong. To ensure the transfer was impossible to misunderstand, Charles placed a symbolic ceremonial key, a thick briefing folder, and the red dispatch box directly before William. Queen Camilla, watching her own influence instantly evaporate, asked sharply whether this new operational power extended to the king's personal household. Charles replied coldly that every single operational recommendation would now have to pass through the prince. The queen consort's face tightened in visible humiliation. Even her personal requests now required her stepson's explicit approval. Princess Anne looked from Charles to her nephew, her initial concern hardening into absolute resolve. She knew her brother had crossed a dangerous line between preparing an heir and prematurely empowering a successor. As the meeting concluded, William reached for the dispatch box, but Anne stopped him in his tracks. She demanded that everyone except Charles leave the room, closing the door firmly behind them to discover exactly what this decision would cost their family. To the public, the upcoming announcement would appear to be a perfectly controlled, harmonious transition between a sovereign and his heir. But inside the family dynamic, it was something far more painful. Charles was privately terrified of becoming a royal figurehead without any real influence, while William feared inheriting the crushing weight of absolute authority before he was emotionally ready. Meanwhile, Princess Anne feared that this sudden, massive transfer of power would expose and ignite every single bitter rivalry the royal household had spent decades struggling to contain. Behind their historic titles stood three real people confronting the harsh realities of duty, aging, loyalty, and the very real possibility of an irreversible family separation. William followed Charles away from the initial meeting, refusing to let the heavy silence become the final answer. Operational control meant total command over the monarchy's daily direction, but the prince had received this power without a single day of preparation. When he asked his father why he hadn't been given more time to process the shift, the king stopped, looked back, and answered with a painful, haunting calm that waiting for certainty is a luxury the crown has never possessed. Charles had spent his entire adult life preparing to reign, yet after finally reaching the throne, he was forced to confront the terrifying reality that his most active years as monarch were already behind him. The transfer protected the institution from hesitation, but it also forced Charles to surrender the very decisions that defined his kingly authority. He genuinely wanted William to succeed, yet every sign of his son's growing strength served as a brutal reminder of what he was actively giving away. Princess Anne carried a completely different wound. Her brother had trusted her counsel through every major crisis, yet he had hidden the greatest decision of his reign from her until the final moment. She felt entirely excluded, but her deepest emotion wasn't anger, it was protective instinct. She remembered the immense, destructive pressure that had followed Charles through his decades as the heir to the throne, and she refused to stand aside while that same crushing weight broke William in silence. Queen Camilla quickly learned just how real and uncompromising this new reality was. Proposed public engagements, household appointments, and staffing requests connected to the crown now required William's signature. The queen consort had once been able to take sensitive matters directly to her husband to get her way, but she now faced a rigid new chain of command. The future king was no longer simply offering polite advice. He had the unilateral power to delay, reject, or completely reshape her plans. Immediately after the meeting, William stepped aside to call Catherine. His voice dropped to a tense whisper the moment she answered, telling her simply that it had happened much sooner than they thought. The Princess of Wales understood the gravity instantly. Even she had not known the final transfer would take place that morning. Hearing the immense strain beneath her husband's controlled words, Catherine pleaded with him to return home before issuing a single operational instruction. William looked toward the red dispatch box waiting beside him. He desperately wanted to leave, to find a quiet hour with his family away from the palace walls, but he told her he could not walk away just yet. Anne watched him end the call as a bitter memory returned to her with absolute clarity. She knew this decision had not truly begun that morning. It had been born months earlier during a disastrous, explosive confrontation when Charles first realized that the old structure of royal command was completely failing. The true catalyst for this transfer did not begin with a legal briefing or a carefully prepared palace plan. It began during a chaotic evening at Windsor Castle, when a major ceremonial Commonwealth reception descended into complete confusion and exposed a dangerous, systemic weakness at the heart of the royal household. Conflicting orders were being issued simultaneously. Senior staff froze in panic, and while Charles hesitated in the face of the crisis, William was forced to step forward. In the heavy silence that followed that evening, Princess Anne witnessed the exact moment her brother finally understood that the monarchy was already naturally turning toward its next leader. Charles had spent months battling delayed decisions, divided advice, and growing internal disputes over which working royals should represent the crown. The network of staff managing the monarchy's daily work had become completely trapped between competing instructions from separate royal offices. Every single delay risked a massive public embarrassment, and every disagreement weakened the public's confidence in the king's command. William had spent months quietly filling those gaps. He spoke directly with senior aides, settled bitter internal disputes before they could ever reach the press, and systematically prevented small administrative mistakes from becoming national scandals. The prince never announced that he was taking control, but palace officials began seeking his judgment anyway. While that growing trust helped the monarchy survive behind the scenes, it also made Charles feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. The ultimate breaking point arrived during that Windsor Commonwealth reception over a dispute regarding the royal procession, the formal order in which family members enter an important event, carrying immense public weight and rank. Camilla's office demanded one specific arrangement, while the king's senior advisors approved an entirely different one. With only minutes remaining before the doors opened, the staff had no idea whose command to follow. When an aide desperately asked the king to choose, Charles looked toward Camilla, then toward his household secretary. But no answer came. He completely froze. William instantly stepped into the vacuum. He gave one clear, authoritative instruction, completely reassigned the procession order, and ended the confusion before the doors opened to the global dignitaries. The reception was a massive success, but that success hurt Charles far more than a public failure might have done. Officials immediately turned toward William for final confirmation on all future matters, leaving the king feeling entirely bypassed inside his own residence. Anne confronted her brother afterward in a private sitting room, warning him that internal uncertainty was becoming far more damaging than delegation. When Charles snapped back that surrendering his decisions would make him look weak, the Princess Royal refused to retreat, firing back that refusing help would make the institution weaker still. William entered the room before the argument could escalate, offering to step back entirely if his involvement had crossed a professional line. Charles studied his son in silence, realizing that removing the prince might restore the traditional hierarchy, but it would also remove the only person capable of preventing total disaster. Later that night, Anne overheard Charles instruct a senior advisor to prepare the options for transferring operational control to William. She knew the reception had been the point of no return.